Hey, everybody, and welcome to this special event. My name is McKay Caston with Preach 360, and I am so excited that you're here because you are going to discover something that is going to set you free. It is going to change your week. It is going to impact your entire life. That's a big promise. I know it is. But what we're going to do is discuss briefly these issues, the pastoral dream. But then we have to face the reality of the pastoral experience. What might be the missing puzzle piece is the Bible's outline, because most of us struggle with structure. We wonder, how can we get started? We have a 1,000-piece puzzle and we don't even know which piece to begin with. And we're going to see how there is actually a tool, a sermon OS, an operating system that is going to help you through the process if you would like. So that's where we're going to start with the pastoral dream, which is how we all would love to finish our sermons by Wednesday. And I'm talking Wednesday at lunch, even if sooner, because that then would give us margin time for ministry, for people. And it wouldn't always, the unfinished sermon, be hanging over us, and then actually being able to get a real day off. We need that. We need emotional, spiritual, physical recovery. We need that ourselves in order to be healthy and have a long-term pastoral ministry that prevents burnout and is actually really good for us, for our families. And if that's the case, it will be good for our church as well. So that's the dream. However, the pastoral reality is that inventing a new sermon from scratch every week, it dominates the calendar. It fills every day. And the lingering stress of the unfinished message drains us mentally. And eventually, sermon prep becomes a burden you dread. And burnout feels just one Sunday away. I was talking to someone literally yesterday who was sharing this about their experience, that they used to love the process, they love preaching, but prep has become a burden, and they really do feel like this next sermon is their last. They just can't go any farther down the road. Now, for many of us, the struggle is simply structure. So if we could fix the structure issue, then we are actually going to be able to find that missing puzzle piece, which is going to change everything. Everything is going to come in a place you're going to see it. And doing puzzles, it's that way. When you had that one piece and you find it, everything else begins to connect to it and it builds itself out. And rather than struggling, you get a flow and everything has its place. So sermon prep doesn't have to feel that way, like that puzzle that you just can't get started. We spend sometimes our best energy just trying to find the first piece. Which one is best? Only to get lost and out. Now that I've got one piece, what goes with it? And then what goes with that one? And we have all these scattered pieces on the board. And by Wednesday, we realize that it's just not making sense. And so we re-outline the sermon, we delete what we have, and we start over, and we do that multiple times. And that's just not sustainable. And that really is a recipe for burnout. It's exhausting, but the good news is it's unnecessary. We don't have to get trapped in that puzzling cycle week after week after week. And here's the reason. There is a distinctively gospel-shaped sermon structure. It's hiding in plain sight. It's the Bible's own sermon outline. And when you see it, when you begin to see this in every passage, sermon prep stress begins to evaporate because the message already is outlined for you. You will fill it in, but the structure's there. The outline is there. You don't have to reinvent it every week. So that leads us to, from the pastoral dream to the pastoral reality to the Bible's outline. And if you've heard me talk about this before, I love this illustration. It really puts it all into perspective for me. For one, there's the puzzle illustration of sermon prep. It's just scattered. How do we put all this together? But there's also this illustration that comes from Bryan Chapell's book, Christ-Centered Preaching, where he describes how each passage in the Bible, every text, every topic and theme is like an acorn. And we can describe a lot about that acorn. We can talk about it being, shiny and on the bottom and smooth, little point. We can describe the cap on it, which is rough and it can get popped off. You can cut the acorn in half and look at all the inner layers where the seed is. But if you don't relate that acorn back to the oak from which it fell and into which it will grow, then you really haven't understood that acorn. And so I began thinking about the relationship between text and story, the overarching meta narrative of the Bible. And something clicked because I realized that if the meta narrative story of the Bible is like an oak tree, then it has DNA. And doesn't it make sense that every text within that tree or acorn that falls from it, that would share the same DNA as the larger tree? And so I began reflecting theologically and realized that meta-narrative, that oak tree story of Scripture, has 4 essential strands of DNA, or we could say 4 layers of depth. It has creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, with final restoration being glorification theologically and experientially, right? And if that is true, then that means that not only is a theological framework, but it becomes a homiletical blueprint, because now we have every text that shares that DNA. So we can look at the text from those 4 categories. However, what we're doing is not using the creation, fall, redemption, restoration terminology. We are using, you'll see here, principle for what is true in the text. Problem: how does the human flesh resist what is true? That's part of the fall. And then gospel: how does Jesus redeem our resistance? Through substitution, by fulfilling what is true in life, and then also in death, serving the sentence for our resistance. And finally, this restoration concept of response. What could it look like now in response to the cross, living in union with Jesus, to experience the filling of the Holy Spirit and live a new life? So essentially, we have this principal truth where we in the flesh resist it, but Jesus now completely reorients our hearts to the truth. No longer are we resisting it because of the flesh. We have these new desires and new motives, not motivated by fear and guilt, but by faith and love and grace. We want to walk in these new ways, and the Holy Spirit provides the enabling grace to do that. So we could go a lot more in depth with all this. I'm trying just to give you the outline itself. This would be the macro. We also have micro frameworks that fit underneath each of these to build out a sermon step by step by step. So each sermon is going to be as unique as the individual text. However, each sermon is also going to follow the same flow because we are going to use this framework to do our expository work. We now have 4 layers to dig into the text from and 4 aspects to tell the story of this text as we move people from the truth to their resistance, to the substitution of our hero Jesus, to the new life that we get to experience in the Spirit. And then once we begin to learn this outline, what happens is that it really removes the structural guesswork. We aren't having to create a puzzle every week. We aren't having to invent a sermon outline. And what happens is this gives you incredible, even instant traction, because you're going to know exactly where to start, what to do next, and when you are finished. Which means that the process here is going to enable you to draft a biblically faithful, theologically robust, gospel-shaped, expository sermon in a single afternoon. We're going to be able to draft it. Now, you'll do some more work on it, of course, because you're going to let it sit and simmer for a couple days, because you'll be done by Wednesday, and then when you come back to review it and refine it, the Spirit has worked within you, and now you're going to make it exactly the way you want it. And that is what we call optimization, a different part of our system. But what we get is traction. What we get is a biblically faithful expository sermon that is tethered to the cross. And we do that because we're going to turn 12 to 20 hours of scattered study, of doing a puzzle on our own, to following a focused 4 to 6 hour drafting process. It's going to show us the template to use and walk us through it. So finally, instead of the week-long stress, you truly will be able to experience mental freedom, regain time, and a real day off, which is not unimportant. So that's the biblical outline. We have built this outline into our Sermon OS. It's called Preach 360. It is a one of a kind, and it's all-in-one Sermon OS built with our own proprietary PPGR preaching system, which reflects the Bible's own outline. It just mirrors creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. I really do think that for many of us, this is going to be the missing piece of the puzzle. If we can have this one piece, it is going to make everything else fall into place. I'm going to show it to you in just a second. I won't go into all of the UI, but I'll show you how this is at least built in. Because unlike generic AI, you're not going to prompt this OS, this tool. You're not going to prompt it to generate your content. It is actually going to prompt you for content, ensuring that the message that is developed is yours, your words and your voice and with your heart. That is the goal. And so essentially, from the raw exegesis that we'll do to the full manuscript, you're just going to follow your guide and you're just going to trust a simple, clear, intuitive process. You don't have to get stuck. You don't have to get bogged down. You don't have to re-outline or rewrite or second guess the message on Saturday. How many of us have done that maybe weekly? You don't have to do that anymore. You're going to have a starting point and a finishing point, and it's going to walk you step by step through the process because you no longer have to invent sermons. Yes, we will bring the content, but we are essentially working through a pre-built template. Every message different, but the flow will be similar. You simply unfold the sermon using the Bible's own sermon outline, and we call it PPGR. So let's take a look inside, and if you have any questions, we'll have a little time afterward for that, but just really briefly, I just want to show you this, and you can pop out the side panel here, which will show you, this is my sermon page, where my sermons are, and yet over here you have a dashboard, you've got a video tutorial library that shows you how to use the app, and we have the PPGR preaching system here. We've got a support page. You can join the community on School, and our premium content is where you will go in and you can review all of our on-demand workshops and webinar replays, and we've got other apps that will help you with sermon prep. We've got video examples of things. We've got lots of content. Okay, that's not what I wanted to show you primarily. I want to get into the actual sermon as to how you will walk through the process. So here's my latest sermon I'm working on, preaching it this Sunday, and I'm going to widen the screen a little bit so that you can, hopefully this will work on your end so you can see a little bit better. On the left here, this is the Pour the Foundation. It's our block one, where we'll start with our text and the audience. We'll go through devotional reflections to prime our own heart for the prep work of this sermon. And then we'll do exegetical analysis, and then we'll identify a keyword. This keyword will give us expository focus and homiletical clarity as we develop the message. And we're going to have our principal statement. It's just one statement about the truth of the text. Problem statement, one statement about the resistance of the human heart to the principle. And these will both all use the keyword to keep us focused. The gospel statement, this is going to reveal how Jesus redeems our resistance. And then the response. In what way can we live a new life in union with Christ? We're also going to develop an anchor illustration and an opportunity for change. These are all just the fundamental building blocks. We're pouring the foundation of the home, right? Then we're going to build the structure. And as you go through each of these sections, it will get checked off as you're done. You'll get checked off. I'll show you what one that's incomplete looks like so you can see from scratch. But essentially what we'll do is we'll go through, it'll create an expository map for us. I'll show you what that is over here in this panel. This is the maps. I'm going to take out the exegesis guide. Even the manuscript, goodbye. So we have just the verse-by-verse map. It'll show you different ways to map the text with the PPGR framework here. And so as we go through this is your introduction. Here's your principal movement. Now when we have the statements, we're simply building out the micro frameworks within the larger framework of PPGR. And we'll do that for each of these movements. It'll ensure that the message is rooted and connected to the specific text you're preaching. And yet go through this familiar theological, homiletical framework. So principle, problem, gospel response, our conclusion, then we'll seal the cracks at the end. We'll revise the message, then we'll optimize it. You see, I haven't done that yet this week. Then we'll practice with rehearsing. With a new sermon, it would look like this. You would have your sermon title, text, version, and audience. You'd plug that in and hit begin sermon. I'm not going to go through all that right now. I'm simply going to show you that. Where you are, it'll have this arrow. And if you want to do it in dark mode, that's kind of cool right there. I like it. You can go through that. And once you finish it, then it's going to turn green, the check mark. If you don't want this panel up, you want more space for your side panels, then you can just click out of that. And this will take you through the process in the same way that the blueprint does over here. Okay, so that's a summary of what the user interface looks like, of how you might use this. And again, the goal of this is that you will preach faithful, gospel-focused sermons. The side benefit is that you will now be able to have a real healthy pastoral life. I think both of those are important. When you have your structure done for you, everything else just falls into place. And if you can deal with and fix the unfinished sermon stress, then it affects everything else. Everything else feels lighter and more doable. And you begin to have a healthy pastoral rhythm so that you can preach the gospel for years and years to come without the next Sunday being the one you burn out with. That's what I hope for you. True pastoral longevity. Okay, so that was a quick summary of everything. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions, reflections, then hey, post them in the chat. The chat should be open and available for you, and I will pop this out so that I can see it really easily. Some of you have been through this and are really familiar with the process and have commented that this truly is not just a pipe dream, that what we're talking about with regard to the real change in your prep process has affected everything else about your ministry. And I'm wondering, I don't want to name names, but one of you who you're here, you said, and it just made my day, that this has injected life into your ministry. And man, that just, I was floating on that all day yesterday. So thanks for sharing that. And there don't have to be any questions now. I just want to really focus on this concept of structure so that we don't begin our sermons week after week after week with question marks, with where do I begin? If you already know where to begin and know what to do next and know when you're done, that just relieves so much of the stress. Okay, so how do we work through narrative passages and be able to tell the story as well as keep the PPGR system? Oh my goodness, that is brilliant. A great question. And actually, narrative passages fit into this so perfectly because what we have in PPGR is the gospel story, right? We have the meta-narrative of the biblical story. So, and I'm picking up a little bit on what Tim Keller said about narrative preaching, and it is this, that what you want to do in a narrative passage, as well as telling it in a sermon, is establish the setting. Any good story, a narrative, has 4 parts to it. It's like, oh, I see where you're going with this, the 4 parts. You have a stage that is set. Well, you have the truth that is revealed. And then you have conflict that is introduced. Okay, so that's the problem with the fall. Then you have a hero who shows up. And in a biblical narrative, that hero is going to often be an anti-hero, or he'll be somebody who does step up and do something. And what we'll see, especially in narratives, is that hero is always a lesser hero, because the greater hero who comes into the story ultimately is Jesus. He is the greater, the ultimate, the better. And so what we have is this hero shows up, and in the last part of the story, you have the new life that is lived and is possible because of what the hero has done. So when you think of it like that, PPGR becomes a storyboard. You have the setting, the conflict, the hero, and the new life that can be lived in light of the hero. Now, someone asked recently, it may have been office hours this week, about, no, it was in my seminary class on Monday night, where I teach homiletics too. The question was, how do we do this with like a whole chapter? I'm like, it sets itself up for a chapter, because with our keyword idea, you're able to then bring everything in that narrative or the chapter to bear upon it, so that you're not getting scattered in your thoughts and wondering, what part of this should I focus on? And because you can't say everything equally that you want to say. You can't cover an entire chapter equally. That's for a commentary, and a commentary is not a sermon. We need focus, right? So focus brings clarity. And so when you are looking at a chapter or a narrative like that, it really sets itself up super intuitively to frame it like, even in a narrative, and maybe even especially in a narrative, if that helps. Yeah, okay, historical redemptive preaching. And that is related to this. There is historical redemptive preaching, which I think we want to add historical grammatical redemptive. The problem is you have these two different schools. You have the grammatical historical, which focuses on the words and the historical context. Then you have one that puts a text in history but looks at it redemptively. And these schools shouldn't, be two schools. They really should just, get together, get married, and have kids. Because when they do, it's the three rings of context that we talk about in the ministry. The first ring is the grammatical, literary ring, where you have your genre, you have the words of the text. The next ring outside of that is the cultural historical ring, where you put those words in their historical cultural context. But if we only go to ring 2, then we're going to miss teaching that acorn in light of the oak. And so we have to go outside of that to the redemptive ring, and that redemptive ring is going to be the interpreter of the words and also the cultural historical context. That's how that all fits together. So, Aiden, you are hopelessly tied to manuscripts. Do you think a manuscript preacher can become a no-notes outline preacher? And can PPGR system help? Well, of course the PPGR system is going to be able to help. I am also hopelessly tied to manuscripts. So of course that can't be a bad thing, right? It took me over 20 years to figure out, what kind of preacher was I going to be? Manuscript, no notes, bullet points, basic outline, that sort of thing. And what I realized is that it took me time to figure out that if you have a manuscript, you have to learn how to not be attached to it, in the sense that you are able to still make eye contact and preach in a conversational way without reading it. We don't want to just read our manuscript. Be sure that we're not reading it. We should, if we have a manuscript, then those who are listening to us preach, they should be stunned that we had a manuscript, because they should be like, I had no idea you were actually reading or had so many words there, because you were so engaged with us. You were doing so much eye contact. So the manuscript, you really have to know it. But it's also positive, because with a manuscript, you can read it numerous times. And the more you read it, the more you get it, and you're not really dependent upon it. Now, the times when I tried to use just, let's say, a raw bullet outline, I was much freer and much more engaged. But I found that I also had a lot more anxiety, and that I often missed things that I wish I had said. And so it's kind of like a give and take. With a manuscript, you're going to, by nature, not be as dynamic and engaged. So you have to learn that. If you're going by bullets, you have to learn, I guess it's in the rehearsal of it, and that you have to go over it and preach it out loud in bullet form so that you know how you're going to fill everything in. Or do this, the middle ground. Write your manuscript out and then turn it into a bullet outline. And guess what? You have the prelectio with 4 or 5 bullets, because we have a micro framework. You have your PPGR, and each of the PPGR movements have micro frameworks too. And so if you'll notice in the Preach 360 web app, when you finished your manuscript, it creates a bullet outline for it. So you could actually use that bullet outline. You can adjust it, you can tweak it, you can edit it, but you may want to consider using that and try that as a bullet outline if you want to move away from the manuscript. If you have trouble really engaging by using a manuscript, that's maybe what I would suggest. And what are some tips on learning that conversational delivery style? Turning the manuscript into that bullet outline is going to be helpful. And I wonder if I have that already generated in this sermon. Let me look and see. Let me get that out of here. I wonder, my outline. Yeah, okay. I do have it. So I'm going to get rid of Addicted to Jesus. So here's the outline. You'll see it's just got little bullets with like a sentence after each. It even has like the mini outline, the A and B, here, A, B, C, D. And this, I might just use this on Sunday. I might give it a shot. And if you go over this enough, you're going to be able to really engage, I think, people. So that's an idea you might want to consider right there, using the bullet outline. If you want to take that chance, it's like, okay, I'm experimenting here, There are times to do that, and you live and learn. Sometimes I remember Mark Richt, when he was coaching Georgia, one time he said, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And he just says, even losses are learning opportunities here. But I think you might really enjoy that. So that would be a good option for Preach 360, to bullet the manuscript. Yeah. And in fact, it does it for you, at the end after you finish your manuscript, because we really want to be committed to writing a full manuscript. That helps us to articulate our thoughts, to make sure we're hitting, the entire blueprint. And then it turns the blueprint into an outline for you that you can then, based on your manuscript, that you can now adjust, edit, revise, and could be a good preaching outline for you. I love you to do it, and let me know what you think. I think that'd be cool. And preaching conversationally is obviously it's practice. I used to, before I did like iPad preaching, I had my pages. At the top of the page, I would write something like, speak clearly and slowly and be yourself. So just go up and be yourself best as you can. I will say this, that if you tend to speak with a preacher voice and you get too formal and that sort of thing, that preaching from a stool, you're like, we can't do that. But I'm gonna tell you, preaching from a stool with a little music stand in front of you, that does something amazing with the conversational dynamic of preaching. If you want to get passionate and fired up, just get off the stool. It's gonna be a really powerful moment in the gospel movement when you get off the stool and you are showing your enthusiasm for the grace of God in Jesus, and then get back on the stool maybe in the response. The stool totally changed my tone in preaching years ago. So now I don't need a stool, but boy, stools help. Anything else? But Aiden, I'm laughing about the hopelessly tied to manuscripts. I feel the pain. Okay, awesome. Hey, anybody else? Y'all can always message me on school. Would love to hear how things are going, making progress. One last thought. Eric, yeah, man. What do you think about preaching a sermon for the entire book first to set the tone for other sermons to follow? Yeah, sure. You can do that. Absolutely. Yeah, it can be more about, overview thematic, PPGR thematic of the message. What is this book about? What is it really going to hit at in the human heart? Why are we going to resist this series, maybe, in a big picture way? How is he revealed, thematically as the hero of this entire book? And then what are some, kind of general ways that it's going to change our lives as we go through it? I think it's a great way to do a series introduction of the whole book, for sure, definitely. The thing is, you can use PPGR to frame anything. I framed this webinar with it, by the way. You're like, what? Okay, see, look, watch this. The pastoral dream is the principle. The pastoral reality is the pain. The Bible's outline is the hope that we have, the good news. And the Sermon OS is the response. This is the application. This is the tool that is going to make it happen for you. So you can do everything that way. Okay, so how do I get my team on board to Preach 360? That's a great question. And I'd say first preach this way for a while and see if they notice any difference, okay? See if they ask any questions maybe about what you're doing differently in your prep. And then I would gently tell them the story about what you've experienced, how you found it, the process of going through learning some new things, and that, hey, I'll be glad to share if y'all are interested about this. And then when they say, yeah, we'd love to hear about it, then you can share more. And, if they want to get trained in it, then they can either, jump on, we have discounts for teams. They can get a really discounted rate if you want to add your whole team to Preach, 360. Or we can do something where we can do an online thing. I'll coach them for an hour, give them this summary of it. But that's how I would start. You preach, they question, you present. It's kind of the steps I think I would take in that. We don't want to force things on them unless we want it to be their idea, kind of a thing. Like, hey, tell me more about this. When that happens, it's kind of like in 1 Peter 3:15, what Peter says, hey, when they ask you, what's the reason for the hope that you have? That's the opportunity right there. You want to live in such a way, preach in such a way that folks ask you. If they're not ready, you can't force something. So you don't go around town and say, let me tell you about the hope I have. I'm not saying that's wrong, but from a culturally evangelistic perspective, we typically see ordinary believers being instructed to, live a certain life that incites or draws out certain questions, and you're able now to explain. Yeah, I hope that helps. Well, thank you all for dealing with the texting thing. On these Wednesdays, trying to set up a kind of webinar format isn't necessarily the best for engagement. So thanks for being willing to do this for now anyway. And again, office hours, Tuesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you're able to make it, have questions, come on by. Would always love to see you then. But until then, have a great rest of your week. I'm about to go and do some revising and optimizing on my message for Sunday. So y'all have a great one. Look forward to seeing you all around soon. Take care.